All right, I am talking about silver and bighead carp and the ways that we're trying to control them, and importantly, whether those ways that we're trying to control these silver and bighead carp, often otherwise known by the not very useful common term Asian carp, whether the ways that we're trying to control silver and bighead carp are useful for controlling other species. And I'll talk about why that's important. Okay, we have things like this going on in the Mississippi River watershed, all the way up the Illinois River to about the Dresden Island Pool, which is a little way downstream of Joliet, if you're familiar with that area. And the main thing that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and a bunch of other state and federal agencies have been doing to try to prevent silver and bighead carp from making it into the Great Lakes, which is the great fear that they make it into the Great Lakes and have the types of food web impacts out there that they've been having in the Mississippi drainage. The main thing that they're doing is that they have put in these electric barriers. They're exactly what they sound like, giant cables running under a canal, putting out a very strong electric field in the attempt to deter fish. We know that this is probably not going to be a perfect solution, so there are now also proposals to use carbon dioxide as an additional barrier. Organisms, including us, animals, we hate carbon dioxide, right? We can deal with it at low levels, but when those get elevated, we get really stressed. We try to avoid it. So what we've been doing is we've been looking at or acknowledging that, sure, silver and bighead carp are really bad. We don't want them to get to the Great Lakes. But there's a whole bunch of other species, and we've been working on the invertebrates that pose a really large risk of moving through this system, going from the Great Lakes to the Mississippi or vice versa. And a really large taxonomic diversity of species that pose really large risks that are not being studied in relation to the electric and carbon dioxide barriers. Next slide. Okay, so we've created this electric barrier in the lab, and then we've exposed species to current conditions. That's this 100%, twice as strong, the electric field, 3 times and 4 times as strong. And what we've found is that invertebrates are much, much less affected by electric fields than fishes are, right? So these barriers, these electric fields have been parameterized for silver and bighead carp, and what we've found is that at those levels, you're getting some altered movement, some stress induced in these invertebrates, but most of them are pretty fine. And you've actually got to go up to an electric field strength about 4 times what we have at the moment before you're really debilitating most of those organisms. And of course, an electric field strength 4 times what it is at the moment is not possible for a whole lot of reasons. Next slide. We found a similar result for carbon dioxide. So the EPA recently authorized carbon dioxide as a pesticide or as a deterrent for aquatic species. And they have authorized levels up to 120 to 150 milligrams per liter. What we found again is that for invertebrates, and I've put up here hyalella and red swamp crayfish just as examples, but these are very illustrative of other species as well. You've got to go well above what's currently permitted by the EPA to get a really strong response from invertebrates. So again, the types of plans that are being made to use this as a way to prevent the spread of silver and bighead carp, it's still going to be a very leaky filter for a whole lot of other species that we're concerned about. The one exception to that with carbon dioxide is bloody red shrimp, which is a really interesting species established here in Lake Michigan, hasn't yet moved into the Illinois River. Next slide. Okay, so I was invited to show one visual. One of the most fun things that we have done in this work is building an electric barrier in the lab, a surprisingly difficult thing for a lab full of people like me, ecologists, right? We've worked with a professor and his students from the Department of Physics at Loyola They've been fully enthused by this project. We've had a lot of fun working with them. So this has been really cool. Future questions. Barges are giant metal objects, and a lot of the invertebrates that pose a risk of moving through this system are going to move through attached to or associated with barges. And we have no idea how those giant metal objects affect the electric field. So one of the things that we're working on now is trying to put big lumps of metal into our barrier tank, and then try and measure how that is changing the electric field and how that might affect organisms. The other thing we're interested in is how water quality affects the passage of organisms. And I believe I'm at time. Thank you.